What you are about to hear is an actual reading from a Chicago Tribune newspaper from the past. Everything that you will hear is exactly as it is written. Please keep in mind that the language used reflects the era it was written. If you enjoy these videos, please click like and also subscribe to the channel and click that bell icon. And now for the news. News as read from the Chicago Tribune for Wednesday, February 5th, 1941. Henry Chop reporting. The weather today. The sun rose at 6:59 a.m. It will set at 5:10 p.m. For Chicago and vicinity, partly cloudy today and tomorrow. Warmer today, moderate to occasionally fresh south to southwest winds. The low temperature 24 degrees, the high temperature 31. Today's headline, Emerson taken by death. Mount Vernon, Illinois, February 4th. Lewis L. Emerson, governor of Illinois from 1929 to 1933, died at his home here late today of a heart ailment. He was 77 years old. Emerson never fully recovered from a severe heart attack he suffered in September and had been constantly under the care of his physician. In November, he had an intestinal ailment but recovered sufficiently to move about. Yesterday, however, his condition took a sudden turn for the worse and he returned to bed. He was conscious until about an hour before his death. At his bedside were his wife, Anne, and two daughters, Mrs. Harold Watson and Mrs. Henry B. Ward, both residents of Mount Vernon. Mr. and Mrs. Emerson observed their golden wedding anniversary in 1937. Emerson was the state's last Republican governor before Dwight Green. He previously had served 3 terms as Secretary of State. He had been in retirement since the expiration of his term as the chief executive. In Springfield, Governor Green said when informed of the death of Emerson, former Governor Emerson stood for one principle above all, and that was his high sense of duty. During his 16 years of public service, the slightest criticism was never raised against his personal integrity. His record in official life is the finest comment on his character. Lou Emerson loved people. He was fond of his friends and intensely loyal to them. He never brooked interference with friendship. His passing is a definite loss to all those who value high ideals. My sympathy goes forth to his family, who knew him as his friends knew him, as one whose personal life was equal in its worth to his fine appreciation of citizenship. And now for world news. Cairo, Egypt, February 4th. British mechanized forces have centered Cairene, ancient city of western Libya, adding the 4th major Italian stronghold to their conquest of the North African colony. The capture of the city placed the British flag within 130 miles of Benghazi, the next big objective of the British. Cairene, some 60 miles west of Derna, formerly was the general headquarters of Marshal Rodolfo Graziani. His retreating forces now are strung out along the road leading westward to Benghazi under savage pounding of the British Air Force. With the entry into this biblical city founded in the 7th century BC, the British in less than 2 months have advanced some 250 miles in their drive to throw Premier Mussolini's forces out of the North African desert colony. Rome, February 4th. 7 hits on a strongly escorted British convoy in the Red Sea by a squadron of Italian torpedo boats were reported today by the High Command. The High Command acknowledged that Italian troops trying to halt a deepening British advance into Eritrea eastward from the Sudan had withdrawn from Agordat and Barentu. It said they had established new positions east of Argadat where they repulsed a British attack. Athens, February 4th. Action over the entire Albanian front was restricted to patrol work and artillery fire today because of heavy rain and mist, reports reaching Athens said. Other reports to Bitold, Yugoslavia said that heavy fighting, including bayonet charges, went on in the Telepine sector despite the weather. At some points, Athens advices said Greek units slipped through the Italian lines and cut telephone communications. Greek artillery was said to have been extremely active, hampering Italian efforts to organize their defenses. London, February 5th. German bombers struck at England's eastern coast last night in the most widespread attack in 2 weeks, but nowhere was the attack described as really heavy. They flew through bitter weather that blanketed part of France with snow and concentrated on an east coast port for several hours. Some firebombs fell in London. Hostile craft were reported also over East Anglia, the Midlands, southwest England, and Wales. Yesterday had brought announcements of a punishing double British blow at the Nazi-occupied French seaport of Brest and of the destruction of 5 German planes. New York, February 4th. The 5,562-ton British freighter Justitia, which recently traded between United States eastern ports and London, has been torpedoed and sunk off the Irish coast, Marine circles said today. No report on its crew is available. Berlin, February 4th. German bombers hit a 10,000-ton merchant vessel off the English coast today and left it afire and listing heavily in a continuation of the heightened war on British shipping, the official German news agency DNB announced. London, February 4th. A 200-ton British ship which sailed itself home after being abandoned aflame 60 miles at sea soon will be put back in service. The ghost vessel edged safely past the dangerous rock by inches and berthed itself safely in a west coast inlet. Its engines were turning over slowly when the crew fled in lifeboats. The flames of undetermined origin burned out quickly. Berlin, February 4th. The vanguard of 45,000 German nationals of Lithuania crossed the border into East Prussia today to begin a resettlement program designed to bring all Lithuanian Germans home into the Reich. It was announced that Russia is cooperating in the movement. Chongqing, China, February 4th. The Chinese today claimed the Japanese drive in Honan province had ended with the first big Chinese victory of 1941. Chongqing's troops then turned their attention to the southwest, where crack Japanese troops were reported preparing for possible early action. This, it was said, would follow should Japan tighten its grip on French Indochina and make demands on Thailand. The Chinese High Command announced the major Japanese-occupied points along the Peking-Hankow Railway had been recaptured and said the Honan campaign cost the Japanese 25,000 casualties. Regarding the Japanese mediation of the Indochina and Thailand dispute, officials declared Tokyo would make every effort to get new bases in Indochina with an unlimited number of Japanese troops in both Indochina and Thailand. Hong Kong, February 4th. Japanese troops effected a surprise landing at dawn today on the Kwangtung province coast somewhere north of Hong Kong. It was officially stated they planned to cut off the route from Hong Kong to Sichuan, Kwantung capital via Weichao, over which they said large quantities of Chinese war supplies have been flowing into the interior from the British colony. A Japanese communique said the troops started to drive Weichao, busy East River port 40 miles north of Hong Kong, was expected to be the first major objective. New York, February 4th. Japan's chief military representative in French Indochina is remaining in the southern part of the colony to watch the troubled situation there. Domai, Japanese news agency, reported in a Saigon dispatch broadcast today from Tokyo. The agency said Major General Rashiro Sumita would stay in Saigon for the time being. instead of returning to his headquarters in Hanoi in the north, and that this is believed to be connected with the latest frontier incidents. Saigon, French Indochina, February 4th. The Japanese Navy, whose activities off southern Indochina have increased recently, put on its first demonstration ashore here today as 120 Blue Jackets from the cruiser Natori paraded through Saigon. London, February 5th. Wendell L. Wilkie left London early today for Lisbon, Portugal on his way home. He will leave Lisbon at midnight tomorrow on a Pan American Clipper, hurrying to Washington, D.C. to testify before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee on President Roosevelt's Lend-Lease bill. Wilkie closed his 9-day stay in Britain yesterday with visits with King George VI and Queen Elizabeth and Eamon de Valera, Prime Minister of Ireland. The outstanding impression of his survey of warring Britain, he said, is the morale and unity of the British people of all classes. London, February 4th. Wendell L. Wilkie told British newspapermen tonight that he was reserving certain conclusions which he has reached or is drawing up for release where they can most effectively contribute to the British cause. He refused to disclose what he told Prime Minister de Valera of Ireland or what de Valera had said to him, but it was clear they did not see eye to eye regarding Ireland's place in the war. The importance of the testimony Wilkie will give before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee or of articles he may write is not minimized here, but there has been a tendency in the British press not to exaggerate the importance of his remarks. One newspaper reporting Wilkie's visit to the Liverpool Cathedral, where he saw some of the finest examples of modern stained glass, quoted him as saying, "They're magnificent. Standing here looking at them makes a man feel his soul. Those that say art died in the Middle Ages ain't right." London, February 4th. Britain is certain that America intends to contribute extensively to fill the gap between British shipping losses and the construction of new ships, because they have appointed themselves the arsenal of democracy. Minister of Shipping Ronald H. Cross said today in an address to the Empire Society, "Even if that help were not forthcoming, it would not mean that we cannot stand a long war. He declared, "But we might have to set out for a longer war than we need to contemplate at the present time." London, February 4th. Harry Hopkins, President Roosevelt's personal envoy to Britain, was a luncheon guest today of Queen Wilhelmina, exiled ruler of the Netherlands. London, February 4th. The British government today again rejected an opposition demand for a detailed statement of peace aims. The opposition has been calling for such a statement since the late Neville Chamberlain, Prime Minister at the outbreak of the war, defined England's objective broadly as to smash Hitlerism. London, February 4th. Former Emperor Haile Selassie, who with his Ethiopian patriots is cooperating with the British forces against the Italians in Ethiopia, has intimated to the British government that he will need outside assistance and guidance in ruling his country after the war, Foreign Secretary Anthony Eden informed the House of Commons today. Eden said the British government would welcome the reappearance of an independent Ethiopian state and would recognize the claim of Haile Selassie to the throne. The British government agreed with Selassie's view and considered that assistance and guidance in economic and political matters should be subject to an international arrangement at the conclusion of peace, the Foreign Secretary asserted. Eden said British military forces would help Selassie regain his throne. Vichy, France, February 4th. Franco-German relationships on which the eyes of Europe are focused remained at a standstill today. Admiral Jean Darlan, Minister of Marine and one of Chief of State Marshal Henri Philippe Pétain's most trusted lieutenants, arrived from Paris after a 24-hour visit there. He had been charged by the Marshal with negotiations with Pierre Laval, ousted Vice Premier and Foreign Minister, and with Germans on the Franco-German collaboration. Sofia, Bulgaria, February 4th. Agriculture Minister Bagrianov, known as a staunch friend of Germany and advocate of Bulgarian cooperation with the Axis, resigned suddenly today. Informed sources said he had disagreed with Premier Bogdan Filov over the question of passage for Nazi troops through Bulgaria. Bagrianov had been mentioned as a possible successor to Filov as prime minister, and his resignation was seen in some quarters as a temporary setback to German influence in this country. Filov himself took over Braganov's portfolio. The Agriculture Ministry is the most important post in the Bulgarian cabinet next to the premiership. Berlin, February 4th. The prefect of police of Paris, Roger Langerin, has been arrested, it was reported in Berlin today. No details were given. Whether he was seized by the Germans or his compatriots was not reported. This is the latest development in a situation that shows that something is stirring in occupied France. In general, judging from information here, that was a Freudian slip. And judging from information available here, the struggle between collaborationists and their enemies has become acute. For 3 months, Langerin has been under intermittent fire in the Paris press. The chief accusation against him was that he was a high dignitary of Freemasonry and had used his position to sabotage the application of the law against secret societies inside the police department. He also was accused of being an avowed opponent of collaboration with Germany. Berlin, February 4th. In a curious barter transaction announced today, Germany gets 17,640 tons of hazelnuts from Turkey in exchange for locomotives. A deal for 4,000 tons of Turkish wheat for more locomotives is underway. German negotiators said more business with the Turks is in prospect because Britain cannot deliver machines that Turkey, her non-belligerent ally, needs. Rome, February 4th. Another important step in the strengthening of the fascist party structure was announced today with a sweeping changing of the guard in the Rome hierarchy. 33 officials, of whom a large number had been called or had volunteered to go to the front, have been replaced by true and tried veterans of the March on Rome and the earliest days of fascism. Of the 13 new directors of the very fascist Federation of Rome, everyone took part in the March on Rome. Of the 9 directors of the Roman fighting fascio, 7 were in the march, as were 6 of the 11 new members of the Federal Commission of Discipline. Lisbon, Portugal, February 4th. A Japanese transport is scheduled to arrive here on February 16th with new naval and air military attachés and other diplomatic personnel for European ports. It was announced tonight. The ship will return to Tokyo with Japanese civilians and diplomats on leave from Europe, it was said. Moscow, February 4th. The Supreme Soviet, Russia's parliament, was summoned today to meet on February 25th, TASS, the official news agency, announced. London, February 4th. A series of tragedies which has befallen the Lambton family through many generations was recalled today when Viscount Lambton, 21 years old son and heir to the 5th Earl of Durham, was found shot dead on the lawn of the family residence, Fenton House, near Wooler, Northumberland. A gun was discovered by his side. Within the last 4 years, several members of the ancient family have come to untimely deaths. According to ancient family tradition, the Lords of Lambton, for 9 generations, were doomed not to die in their beds. The story dates from the time of the Crusades, when one Lambton killed a worm so huge that it would wind itself around a hill near Lambton Castle. But the price of his victory was that he should kill the first living thing that he met after slaying the worm. Meeting his father, he shirked, with the result that the curse was laid on the family. London, February 4th. The much-proclaimed national loaf of bread will soon make its appearance in Britain, the Food Ministry disclosed today. It will be made from 85% whole wheat flour, which is said to be more digestible than bread of 100% whole wheat. Arrangements have been made with millers and bakers for immediate production of whole wheat flour and bread in quantities sufficient to meet all demands. The loaf will be standardized. The much heralded fortified white loaf, to which vitamin B1 and calcium would be added, will not be available for a few months, the Food Ministry said. Some food experts complained that the vitamized bread would be a snare and a delusion if the public believed in its advertised health properties. Bucharest, Romania, February 4th. Authorities today said a search in 4 girls' high schools had resulted in discovery of a great number of revolvers, many of them hanging from gold or silver chains inside the girls' dresses. Havana, Cuba, February 4th. Colonel Jose Pedraza and Lieutenant Colonel Bernardo Garcia, ousted head of the Cuban Army and former head of the National Police, accused of a seditious plot against President Fulgencio Batista, flew to Miami, Florida tonight for an indefinite exile in the United States. They were accompanied in a chartered plane by their wives and children. Captain Owen Parr, Pedraza's military aide, and Major Juan Serra, Garcia's brother-in-law. Colonel Angela Gonzalez, ousted head of the Navy, and others implicated in the alleged plot to assassinate Batista and seize control of the government, remained in custody here. Thus, Batista's brief political storm appeared to have subsided, and he went ahead with the program which apparently had led to the trouble, a reorganization of the nation's armed forces. He appeared to have emerged stronger than ever. Damascus, Syria, February 4th. 3 Syrian nationalists convicted of the assassination last July 6th of an extreme nationalist leader, a Dr. Chabandar, were executed today. Dr. Chabandar was killed, it was said, because he had abandoned the fight for full freedom from France. And now for national news. Washington, D.C., February 4th. A congressman's repeated reference to Great Britain as America's first line of defense and an apparent reflection on American courage caused a blow-up today in the House of Representatives during general debate on President Roosevelt's dictator bill. Several members sprang to their feet shouting protests. The outburst came as Representative Charles L. Gifford, Republican, Massachusetts, was urging passage of legislation that would grant the chief executive dictatorial powers in the transfer to Britain of this country's fighting equipment, military secrets, and factory output. England is our first line of defense, Gifford declared. We must hold up the morale of those heroic people. Would to God I could be sure my own people would have the same morale under the same circumstances. Are you calling Americans cowards? Representative Harold Knutson, Republican, Minnesota, questioned sharply. No, I'm not calling anyone a coward, Gifford replied. I'm just asking that we do everything in our power to aid another democracy in its hour of peril. New York, February 4th. Aviation circles said today that Air Chief Marshal Sir Hugh Dowding, former chief of the British Royal Air Force fighter squadrons in this country on a special mission, is appealing to American manufacturers for 400-mile-an-hour pursuit ships carrying 20-millimeter cannons capable of penetrating heavy German airplane armor. German bombers operating on short hops from the French coast and unencumbered by heavy fuel loads can stand the additional weight of cockpit armor, it was said. Aviation Circle said about 400 Curtiss P-40 pursuit planes have reached Britain recently and are being armed in keeping with the British ideas. They will be supplemented next month by the Bell Airacobra. Washington, D.C., February 4th. Senator Burton K. Wheeler, Democrat, Montana, undaunted by President Roosevelt's personal and bitter attack upon him, continued hammering at the administration and its war policies today by declaring that the United States does not possess one single warplane capable of holding its own in the European war. Wheeler, active leader of Senate opposition to the pending dictator bill, whose enormous powers Mr. Roosevelt claims he needs to help the British, said that he received his information from an absolutely reliable source. As of January 1st, the Montana senator asserted, the country did not own a single military plane equipped with self-sealing gas tanks, armor protection, or sufficient firepower to meet the test of the current war. Washington, D.C., February 4th. In a minority report tonight on the bill to raise the public debt limit from $45 to $65 billion, Republicans on the House Ways and Means Committee, as a unit, assailed the New Deal's spending and borrowing orgy and advocated a limit of not more than $60 billion. The minority report, signed by the 10 Republicans on their committee, took exception to the action of the committee yesterday in reporting the bill favorably and warned of rapid approach to national bankruptcy. Washington, D.C., February 4th. The liquidation of all British resources in the United States before the American taxpayer is called upon to pay for aid to England was demanded today by General Robert E. Wood, acting chairman of the America First Committee, in testimony before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, which is considering President Roosevelt's dictator bill. Wood, who is chairman of the board of Sears, Roebuck and Company, declared the British evidently had not listed large corporations, insurance companies, and extensive real estate in their balance sheet presented to the United States Treasury, which purported to show that England's dollar exchange would be exhausted when pending orders for war materials are filled. Washington, D.C., February 4th. Drastic administrative changes, which had been previously shelved by the J. Warren Madden Edwin S. Smith majority on the National Labor Relations Board, have been made effective, it was announced today. Under Dr. Henry A. Millis, the new chairman, and with the concurrence of Dr. W. M. Leeserson and finally Smith, changes in administrative organization and procedures designed to improve and speed the board's operations were recently adopted and are being handled by the newly appointed personnel. The office of the executive secretary, recently vacated by Nathan Witt, and which long had been the bottleneck of the board, now performs the routine duties of an office manager. Its other duties have been dispersed and decentralized. New York, February 4th. The New York City Civil Service Commission and its president, Paul J. Kern, today were charged with having perverted its functions to perform widespread acts of favoritism for Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia and his official family, even to violating the law and disregarding ordinary ethics. The charges were contained in a 23-page report on the first 6 months of a city council investigation submitted today by Alfred E. Smith, Jr., committee chairman. Seattle, Washington, February 4th. The City Council passed an ordinance today granting Mayor John E. Carroll, a Reserve Army major, power to enforce blackout regulations and to declare defense emergencies and draft citizens for defense service. The council voted unanimously after a hearing at which Hugh DeLacy, former councilman, opposed the measure as a Little Hitler bill, which he said he feared might be used as a club over organized labor. A threat of drastic actions by the government to prevent speculative hoarding of scrap aluminum was made yesterday, along with announcement that production of new aluminum in 1940 exceeded the 1939 former record output by 26%. C.A. Bishop, Deputy Administrator of the National Defense Commission's Price Stabilization Division, said in Washington, D.C. that scrap or secondary aluminum is selling for more than virgin ingot aluminum. He termed this an anomalous situation and warned that the president has authority to requisition the scrap by executive order. The Price Stabilization Division prefers to avoid such a step, Bishop said, but indicated action is being considered. Detroit, Michigan, February 4th. Henry Ford, it was learned here today, has informed the War Department he is ready not only to build parts and subassemblies for bombing planes, but that he would like to construct the complete plane on a moving assembly line. Ford's proposal was made after announcement of the tentative agreement under which the Ford Company would make parts for subassemblies for Douglas and Consolidated bombers. The manufacturer already has drafted plans for a special factory with a mile-long assembly line to be erected on property Ford already owns and of sufficient area to provide a large airport adjacent to the plant. There was no intimation as to the rate of output Ford would expect to attain in assembling the complete bomber. It was explained, however, that the schedule of production on the Pratt & Whitney radio air-cooled 18-cylinder engines, which Ford expects to start turning out late this summer, calls for one engine an hour. Langley Field, Virginia, February 4th. An Army bomber carrying 12 men of the Air Corps from Fort Douglas, Utah, crashed and burned on the takeoff here this afternoon. Officers said none of the crew was injured. The big ship had been brought here for maneuvers, which were watched yesterday by Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson. It was taken off from the base for Dayton, Ohio, its first scheduled stop on the return flight to Fort Douglas. The big ship drove down the runway, went into a ground loop, and crashed. The accident occurred at 4 p.m., officers said. The crew escaped from the bomber after it caught fire. Balboa Canal Zone, February 4th. Squeezing through the Panama Canal locks with scant clearance, the 30,000-ton United States liner America, largest American-built merchant ship, tonight completed her first trip through the canal and headed for California. Passengers reported a tense moment when the America shaved by the British steamer Orduna in a narrow channel. Washington, D.C., February 4th. Justice Department officials said today that efforts to settle an antitrust complaint against the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers by negotiation had collapsed again and that criminal charges would be filed in Milwaukee tomorrow. Victor O. Waters, Special Assistant to the Attorney General, who has been in charge of the long negotiations, is in Milwaukee ready to file an information alleging that ASCAP has engaged in illegal control of music. New Orleans, Louisiana, February 4th. Joseph G. Strecker, unnaturalized Austrian immigrant and a former communist who has been awaiting a hearing on deportation proceedings here, was freed from jail tonight on his own recognizance. Eugene Kessler, New Orleans Director of Immigration and Naturalization, said that an order from Washington had been received commanding that the deportation hearing be held on an indefinite date in Hot Springs, Arkansas. He added that the delay probably was ordered because work conditions were such as to prevent deportation to Europe. Oswego, New York, February 4th. 4 members of a barge canal dredging crew were rescued today after more than 5 hours in a motor launch that hung precariously on the edge of a 40-foot power dam. The 60-foot launch, from which the men were breaking ice in a canal above the dam, broke loose from its moorings and floated out of control to the falls. There it hung until the canal workers could reach the men in a rowboat. Denver, Colorado, February 4th. A huge mogul-type passenger locomotive exploded at a street crossing in southwest industrial Denver today, catapulting its boiler and cab 63 feet through the air and injuring 25 persons, none seriously. Weighing 436 tons, the boiler and cab arched backward over a switch engine and crushed an American Railway Express car. Steam and flames shooting from the exploding locomotive injured nearby motorists, broke windows in factory buildings, and injured workmen on a flat car. The passenger train was being switched from the Union Station to the Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad yards when the blast occurred. No passengers were aboard. George F. Dodge, an executive of the railway, said, "It seems that low water in the locomotive boiler was the cause of the explosion." Washington, D.C., February 4th. The Federal Bureau of Investigation announced tonight that James David Thompson, 24-year-old waiter, had been arrested at Philadelphia on a charge of attempting to extort $8,500 from Betty Grable, motion picture actress. Thompson is accused of having mailed a letter from Philadelphia January 24th, demanding that Miss Grable mail the money to him in care of General Delivery, Philadelphia. He threatened her with bodily harm if she failed to comply, agents said. Thompson probably will be arraigned tomorrow on a charge of violating the federal extortion law. He was sentenced to Atlanta Federal Prison in 1936 for violating the postal laws. Los Angeles, California, February 4th. Hedy Lamarr wants her screen name made official, so she filed a Superior Court petition to change it legally from Hedwig Eva Maria Kiesler. She listed her birthplace as Vienna, November 9th, 1914. And back to local and regional news. Memphis, Tennessee, February 4th. When the members of the 33rd Division Illinois National Guard reach Camp Forest near Tullahoma, Tennessee during the period between March 10th and March 21st, they can expect to begin learning to be field soldiers at once. This information was given today by Lieutenant General Benjamin Lear, commander of the 2nd Army, of which the 33rd Division is a component. The training will be strenuous, but at the start will not be too hard for men with office muscles, General Lear said. The hardening process will be gradual. Veteran National Guard officers say that a citizen soldier who has completed the 3-year enlistment in the National Guard has reached a stage in training comparable to a regular Army soldier who has just completed 30 days in a recruit reception center. About the beginning or middle of April, we plan to augment the National Guard regiments with selected trainees, General Lear said. Up to that time, the 33rd Division will be allowed to season itself, put its own house in order. But after that, the regiments in the division will take an active part in training recruits of their own. More selectees will be assigned to the division sometime in July, but these will be seasoned men who have gone through an Army reception center such as Camp Grant, Illinois. When the regiments are filled in accordance with the Army War Strength tables, the training of the division will be started in earnest. Then will come battle problems and maneuvers. By this time, the division will have been built to approximately 17,000 men. It is expected that the 33rd will move to Camp Forest with approximately 12,000 men, of which 40% can be classed in the recruit stage. The augmentation in April will build it to about 14,000 men, and the assignments in July will fill the balance. Similar methods will be used for the 5 other divisions that comprise the 2nd Army. When filled to the allotted war strength in tables of organization, the 2nd Army will have approximately 117,000 men. More than 43% of the thousands of Cook County draftees examined by physicians during the November and January induction periods were rejected for general military service, Major Lester Johnson, State Selective Medical Director, reported yesterday. He said local draft board physicians accounted for 30.3% of the rejections and Army physicians at the county induction center for 12.8%. Rejections of draftees for physical reasons ran far higher than in the World War days, Major Johnson said. Then, an average of only 21.2% of the men examined throughout the nation were rejected, 17% by local draft board doctors, and 4.2% on their second examination by Army physicians. Federal Judge Charles E. Woodward refused yesterday to take any steps to prevent Selective Service officials from inducting Julius Thunak, 30 years old, into the Army next Monday. He denied Thunak's request for a temporary injunction restraining his local draft board from forcing his induction. Thunak, a salesman who resides at 2146 Belle Plaine Avenue, asserted in his petition that his mother, Mrs. Benetta V. Thunak, with whom he lives, is suffering from heart trouble and that he has to pay for costly medical treatments for her. For this reason, he contended that he should be granted deferment. His attorneys announced that they will appear in court within the next few days to seek a hearing on a permanent injunction. Meanwhile, 3 men who failed to notify their draft boards of changes of address were brought before Federal Commissioner Edwin K. Walker on charges of violating the Selective Service Act. All pleaded not guilty and were placed under bonds of $500. Chicagoland has become one of the most important centers in the nation's rapidly expanding armament industry, officials of the Chicago Ordnance District said yesterday. Plants throughout the area are concentrating more and more on their production capacities on the task of filling defense contracts, they said. 2 Milwaukee manufacturing plants are turning out the new 105mm howitzers, less carriages, for the field artillery, and another Milwaukee concern is engaged in the manufacture of 500-pound aerial bombs. At Hammond, Indiana, a huge railroad equipment firm is making the carriages for the 105s and also is turning out 81mm mortars and artillery shells. Other cities in which defense contracts have been placed include Clinton, Iowa, where machine gun mounts are being made, Cedar Rapids, Iowa, machine gun cradles, Moline, 75 millimeter gun shells, Minneapolis 3-inch anti-aircraft shells, Racine, Wisconsin 155 millimeter gun shells, LaPorte, Indiana 90 millimeter anti-aircraft gun mounts, and Harvey, Illinois radial diesel engines. Representatives of the International Harvester Company and the Farm Equipment Workers Organizing Committee, which called a strike at the harvester firm's tractor works last Wednesday, explored the possibilities of peace at a conference in the Stevens Hotel yesterday. The parley will be resumed today. David T. Rodley, federal labor conciliator, called the meeting. He was assisted by P.J. Cullen of the Illinois Department of Labor. The union, a CIO affiliate, has demanded the elimination of piecework, a raise in minimum rates of pay to 75 cents an hour for men and 65 cents an hour for women, and recognition as the sole bargaining agent for all harvester plants. Springfield, Illinois, February 4th. Republican members of the Illinois House of Representatives began today to line up firmly behind the O'Neill resolution intended to voice the state's protest against the enactment of the Roosevelt Dictator Bill. Representative Lottie Holman O'Neill, Republican Downers Grove, who introduced the resolution, said she had made some inquiries as the Assembly began its third working week and, as a result, hopes for its immediate recommendation by the Executive Committee to which it was referred. Chairman Reed F. Cutler, Republican Lewistown, has posted the newly required 24-hour notice that the committee will hold a hearing immediately after the morning session of the House tomorrow. Debates on the dictatorship bill and a series of meetings urging that the United States stay out of the European war were announced yesterday by Cornelia Howe, Secretary of the Chicago chapter of the America First Committee. Gordon Sargent, Chicago businessman, will explain the principles of the America First Committee to the Kiwanis Club at noon today in the Windermere East Hotel. At 8 p.m., Dr. Albert Angus Campbell, Associate Professor of Physiology at Northwestern University, will speak at a meeting of the Evanston chapter of America First in the community room of the State Bank and Trust Company in Evanston. Indianapolis, Indiana, February 4th. Procedure to be followed in investigating alien votes on which is based the contest of Governor Henry F. Schricker's election will be discussed tomorrow at the first meeting of the Joint Legislative Committee selected to conduct the inquiry. The 14-member committee of senators and state representatives will designate one of their number as chairman and another as secretary, when they will outline the steps they will take in reaching a decision on the contest, which is the first of its kind in the state's history. The committees of 7 members from each house of the General Assembly will be named several days ago after a protest had been filed against the election of Schricker, the only successful Democratic state candidate in the November 5th voting. Attorney General George F. Barrett yesterday announced the opening of an anti-vote fraud division of his office in Chicago and the appointment of Albert J. Messerow, chairman of Chicago's Joint Civic Committee on Elections, as Assistant Attorney General in charge of it. Barrett outlined the purposes of the division as follows. Number 1, to make a study of Illinois election laws so changes may be worked out with members of the legislature. Number 2, to find methods of putting teeth in state laws so that convicted vote manipulators can be dealt with in keeping with the gravity of their offense. Number 3, to coordinate and make permanent all volunteer anti-vote fraud organizations. Number 4, to receive complaints and evidence from citizens who have seen vote frauds committed, to investigate all such reports, and to instigate proper action if the evidence warrants it. Number 5, to enlist the aid of church, civic, educational, professional, and social groups in a continuous crusade to make vote thefts virtually impossible. Barrett said the division was established in Chicago because vote thievery has been most common in Cook County. Lawrence Rasmussen, former deputy coroner and Democratic precinct captain, was convicted last night by a jury in the criminal court of Judge Stanley H. Klarkowski of vote fraud conspiracy in the November 1938 election. John Franklin, an assistant precinct captain, was acquitted of the same charge by the jury. Rasmussen faces a sentence of 1 day to 1 year in the House of Correction. Before the case went to the jury yesterday, Rasmussen testified that he had not, as the state charged, ordered short pencil ballot marking or given illegal instructions to voters during the election in the 15th precinct of the 1st Ward. Rasmussen's attorney, Arnold Harris, filed a motion for a new trial, and Rasmussen was released under the $14,000 bond, which already has been posted in connection with this and 3 other indictments which still are pending against him and other defendants. No other indictments are pending against Franklin, who was released. State's Attorney Courtney said last night he will aid to the utmost the efforts of the Chicago police to destroy the gambling empire of Frank the Enforcer Nitti. His assertion came after lawyers in racket court set up a barrage of legal technicalities which resulted in the discharge by Judge Michael Tremko of 158 horse race bettors. The latter had been seized Monday in raids on an expensive handbook on the 8th floor of the Hamilton Hotel and a lesser bookie joint at 23 East Harrison Street. The phonograph divorce case spun 2 new tunes yesterday. First, Lawrence Feeler, radio engineer, told Judge Randolph DeSort the alleged details of a hotel room rendezvous between his wife Edith and another man, but said he had destroyed a phonographic record of the incident. Then, in the opening of a new line of questioning, Feeler was asked whether he had ever kissed his wife's sister. He refused to answer. Mrs. Lawrence Feeler, who is 24 and lives at 8855 Low Avenue with her daughter, Jean, 4, has a divorce bill pending charging cruelty. Feeler, also 24 and living at 710 Lakeshore Drive, countered with a cross bill alleging misconduct. At earlier hearings, he had promised to bring in photograph records to support his accusation. Feeler came to Judge DeSort's chambers yesterday with the recording instruments. He said that early on the morning of September 20th, 1940, he saw his wife and a man identified only as Roy enter the Low Avenue building. Feeler parked himself outside apartment 720 and said he heard his wife and Roy inside the room. Feeler then demonstrated his modern method of eavesdropping. He showed how he placed a small microphone at the bottom of the door, connected it with the recording apparatus, and himself donned headphones. If all this happened, which I don't believe, where is the record? Asked attorney Norman Becker, representing Miss Feeler, who has denied her husband's charges. I destroyed it last week, Feeler said, because what happened inside that apartment was terrible, and I didn't want it to become public. I don't want our daughter, Jean, to ever know of it. Questioned by his attorney, Robert Cantwell Jr., Feeler related what he allegedly heard through the headphones. Feeler played one partly indistinct record, which he said had been made of a telephone conversation between himself and Miss Mildred Dunn, his wife's sister. The woman's voice on the record related that on one occasion, she had seen Roy in bed at the Low Avenue apartment and Mrs. Feeler in the room clad only in a bathrobe. Mrs. Feeler said that she could not recognize the voice as her sister's. Did you ever kiss Miss Dunn or neck with her? Becker said. Cantwell told his client not to answer. He'll answer or I'll hold him in contempt of court, Judge DeSort said. This bears on the question of his fitness to have custody of his daughter. The judge continued the hearing to tomorrow to give Feeler time to consider whether he would answer. 5 young men who police said have confessed burglarizing 14 Southside stores were held last night by the South Chicago Police. They were rounded up after Aloysius Biernacki, 15 years old, 8948 Escanaba Avenue, was seized by Detective Thomas Powers while reportedly looting a restaurant at 89th Street and South Chicago Avenue. He named alleged associates in other thefts, police said, and they were arrested. Others held are Stanley Mazer, age 16, of 8856 Escanaba Avenue, Leonard Wozniak, age 18, of 8902 Escanaba Avenue, Frank Poniatowski, age 17, of 8804 Colfax Avenue, and Joseph Baylog, age 17, of 8533 Mackinac Avenue. Poniatowski and Baylog are on probation in the juvenile court for burglary and Benaki and Mazer are students at Bowen High School. Mrs. Aino Orgo Tasavinen, 25 years old, who was acquitted last May in the slaying of Mrs. Mabel Buchanan, foster mother of Mrs. Tasavinen's 5-year-old daughter, yesterday was granted a divorce by Judge Rudolph DeSort. Mrs. Tavainen charged that her second husband, George, a railroad employee whom she married April 1st, 1939, deserted her April 28th of that year. Her attorney, Samuel L. Mantalone, said she would waive alimony. She was granted the right to resume the name of her first husband, Orgo. Mrs. Tasvinain lives at 734 Briar Place, where her daughter, Tammy Orgo, resides in the custody of Mrs. Tasvinain's mother, Mrs. Edla Siki. Mrs. Tasvinain shot and fatally wounded Mrs. Buchanan March 13, 1940 in the juvenile court building after a hearing on the custody of Tammy. Valparaiso, Indiana, February 4th. 15 Gary residents have filed suit in Porter County Superior Court for an injunction against Leonard and Mabel Collison to retrain them from feeding birds. They say food thrown in Collison yard attracts many birds, which create annoying conditions about plaintiff's premises. Subscribers of the Illinois Bell Telephone Company who disapprove of the company's monthly billing forms, which identify toll calls by city only without listing the exchange or number called, may have fully itemized bills on request, the company announced yesterday. Notices to subscribers and advertisements have been prepared announcing the company's detailed billing service for those requesting it, according to Everett E. Friganza, Public Relations Counsel for the company. A superhighway construction program for Chicago and 5 counties of the metropolitan area is to be prepared by the Chicago Plan Commission for presentation at the current session of the Illinois legislature. Toll roads are contemplated. Construction costs would be paid by bonds sold to the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. The Plan Commission at a meeting yesterday afternoon adopted the superhighway program as a special order of business. The new executive director, T.T. McCroskey, was instructed to confer with governmental agencies and to make a preliminary report to the executive committee promptly. The country's airlines are preparing to explore the possibilities of developing cargo service on a far larger scale than the present Air Express, it was learned yesterday. One airline company already is making such a survey. The completion of various surveys, it was said, may see the establishment of regularly scheduled freight planes operated separately from the passenger runs. Most of the studies are expected to be finished by the end of the year. Any large-scale increase in the volume of air freight, observers said, probably would enhance Chicago's position as the point for central distribution. Indianapolis, Indiana, February 4th. John K. Thatcher, last survivor of the number 10 club of Frankfort, Indiana, choked and wept tonight as he drank a toast to his dead friends from a 54-year-old bottle of champagne. Thatcher became the last survivor of the club with the death last month of his cousin, Thomas C. Paris, Frankfort bachelor. The 79-year-old retired printing executive sat alone at a table in the Indianapolis Athletic Club and lifted his glass to 9 empty chairs representing the bachelor cronies with whom he formed the number 10 club in 1886. They saved the bottle from a case of 148 served at their first dinner and pledged that the last man should toast the rest. "This is a sad occasion for me," Thatcher said. "They were such good fellows. I've been in luck to have such friends as they were." Friends and relatives sat at a nearby table. They included 2 of the last man's sons, George and Abe J. Thatcher. The ancient champagne disappointed reporters who tasted it. It had been opened and resealed in the past and had lost its life. And in sports, New York, February 4th. The New York Rangers tonight retained the William J. Macbeth Trophy, emblem of the City Hockey Championship, by playing a 2-2 tie with the New York Americans in the National League game before 9,970. Before this game, the Rangers led 4-1, and the draw was sufficient to clinch the trophy. Rookie Buzz Weicherle, by scoring his first Major League goal, lifted the Americans into the tie with the last period more than half gone. Boston, Massachusetts, February 4th. The Boston Bruins scored twice in the first 65 seconds of overtime play to extend their string of National Hockey League games without a defeat to 16 and defeat the Montreal Canadiens 5-3 before 11,000 tonight. The league record of 19 consecutive games without a defeat was set last year by the New York Rangers. Eddie Wiseman drove in Roy Conacher's angled pass and broke the tie after 12 seconds of overtime play. Captain Dit Clapper then clinched the triumph by scoring unassisted the 201st goal of his 14-year Major League career. Notre Dame, Indiana, February 4th. Notre Dame reserves carried the load as the Irish chalked up their 8th straight basketball victory, 46-38, at the expense of North Dakota tonight. Art Pope, Chicago junior forward, led the Notre Dame attack with 12 points. George Sobek and Frank Quinn, regular center and forward, and Jim Carnes, Sobek's sub, were unable to play because of colds. Notre Dame led at the half 30-16. DePaul will meet Toledo University, and Loyola will face Temple in the latest of the series of basketball doubleheaders to be played in the Coliseum tonight. Toledo has scored a record of 17 victories in 18 games, and Temple will attempt to continue on the trail to the national championship, which it won in 1938. Toledo will be led by its center, Bob Gerber, who scored 359 points last year for an average of 15 points per game. So far this year, he is averaging 17 points per game, a pace that should net him over 400 points for the season. The Rockets have scored an average of 54 points per contest, 33 for their opponents, and have beaten teams as Cincinnati, Cornell, Dartmouth, St. Joseph's, and Bradley, the latter 54-33 at Peoria. In addition to Gerber, the Toledo team, co-champions of the Buckeye Conference, has two fine shots in Captain Marshall Carlson and Bart Quinn. Together with Gerber, this trio has averaged 36 points per game. Elmer Gaynor of DePaul will furnish Gerber with some of the strongest opposition he has faced all winter. Gaynor, who had been suffering from recurring attacks of influenza, signalized his return to form by scoring 22 points against St. Joseph's and playing a good game against the Quins. The Blue Demons won both games. Temple will bring to Chicago a team that has beaten Illinois, Rhode Island State, Oklahoma, Oregon, 1939 national champions, and LaSalle, which broke Santa Clara's winning streak. The Owls, coached by Ernie Messacomer, will play fast-breaking style, all five men handling the ball, all ready to break for the basket. Wibbs Coutts, absent from the lineup for the last 10 days due to influenza, will start for the Chicago Bruins tonight when they meet the Goodyears of Akron in the 132nd Regiment Armory, Madison, and Rockwell Streets. In a Windy City League contest, which opens the program at 7:45 o'clock, the Doc Masons will meet the Richie Grahams. While individual scoring duels between Ben Stephens of the Goodyears and Coutts and John Pelkington of the Goodyears and Mike Novak, rival centers, are certainly more important is the predicament facing each quintet. Both are battling for a place in the National Basketball League playoffs. The Goodyears, with 10 victories and 18 starts, are one of three teams in the league that have suffered 8 losses. Chicago and Sheboygan are the others. The Bruins have 9 more games to play, including tonight's contest, and 5 of those must be won to assure a place in the playoffs. The Detroit Eagles, who have split even in 14 games and have 10 more to play, is the team the Bruins have to beat to get into the playoffs. The last time the Goodyears and Bruins quintet met at the Armory, the Invaders won 44-38 in overtime. Then the Bruins won 3 straight before being stopped by Sheboygan last Thursday. Coutts, ailing high scorer of the team, has missed the last 2 contests. The The Cubs will be in a position to offer their constituents a little holiday amusement at bargain rates next season. They'll be on their own Wrigley Field July 4th and Labor Day, 2 games for 1 admission on each occasion, with the Cardinals and World Champion Reds as respective visiting attractions. The Cubs will spend their other holiday, May 30th, in a double toil at Pittsburgh. The above pertinent items were revealed yesterday with publication of the National League's 1941 schedule. As announced at the December meeting, the Cubs will open at home April 15th with the Pirates, the other inaugurals being the Cardinals at Cincinnati, Boston at Philadelphia, and New York at Brooklyn. Notre Dame, Indiana, February 4th. Notre Dame today joined the rest of the football world in speculation concerning a successor to Elmer F. Layden, who resigned as athletic director and head coach yesterday to accept the commissionership of the National Football League. Almost every Notre Dame trained coach in the last 30 years had been mentioned by tonight, with participants in the guessing taking out time to extend congratulations to the retiring Irish leader. The Reverend J. Hugh O'Donnell, president of the university, said an official announcement of a successor probably will be made before March 1st. The faculty board in control of athletics will hold a special meeting Friday night. Father O'Donnell said, "Naturally, I shall be guided by the recommendations the board makes." Burbank, California, February 4th. Mrs. Frida Jeffries, age 60, wife of the former world heavyweight champion James J. Jeffries, died tonight shortly after she was struck by an automobile. Jeffries was at a lodge dinner in Santa Monica at the time. Friends said he nearly collapsed when informed of his wife's death. They had been married 37 years. Jeffries met her in New York when he was on tour as champion. The driver of the automobile which struck Mrs. Jeffries was released pending an inquest. New York, February 4th. A note of bewilderment caution was sounded today by a Georgia manufacturer of baseball bats in his report to the National Association of Manufacturers on defense production capacities. "We do not see," he wrote, "that our product would be of particular use strictly defense work." And that is sports, and that is the news for Wednesday, February 5th, 1941. Henry Chop reporting. Have a swell day.